Okie dokie, let's get this started. Hey, everybody who is tuning into the channel these days. First of all, thanks for checking it out. As I was advertising for tonight's live stream, I'm going to start going more into like a specific topic, just so that the streams are a little bit more focused and people have a bit more of an idea of what they're signing up for when they sit down and invest the 30-40 minutes with me or whatnot. So tonight I'm going to be talking about drawing the surfacing onto your forms or your characters. Maybe your character's got a jacket, or you got a character with a lot of scales, or they're furry, or there's whatever you've got going on to create that final level of detail and really make the character pop, really make them jump off the screen. So without further ado, why don't we go ahead and jump into that? I've got my trusty session switcher here. So let's switch that over to the sketch mode. There we go. As usual, I'm working tonight in a program called Autodesk Sketchbook. It is one of my favorite sketching programs just because it's very, the user interface is really simple. It loads up quick. It's quite responsive. I like it a lot. You can use these techniques in literally any program, or even working on pen and paper, traditional mediums as well, because these techniques are universal. It's not tied to any particular way of working. So kind of similar to the image that I kind of opened with in the thumbnail for tonight's stream. Once we have established the forms that we're going to be working with, and worked through our rough stages and worked through our cleanup stages and gotten to those kind of last stages where we're adding in the details. That's where I see a lot of drawings kind of fall flat, because oftentimes there'll be a form like what I've drawn here, and the problem with surfacing details that don't conform to the way that these forms were drawn is that we, as a viewer, we have a mental expectation of the volume of that form. And even though the audience or the viewer, even though they might not have the professional vocabulary or the training to really say for certain why something feels off, they're still gonna feel it. And something about the drawing, if you're trying to capture a believable rendering, something about it is just gonna seem off. So there's a few techniques that we want to use when we're preparing for adding those final details. And one of the most important techniques that comes to my mind is something that we call drawing through. Drawing through. So that's essentially what you see me doing here. Is I'm drawing the surface of these forms, but I'm not stopping, I'm not only drawing or indicating the front side of that form. I'm also wrapping my contour around to the back side and drawing all the way around that form, so that when I do come back around on this side here, the trajectory that I'm indicating that surface coming around at is gonna feel more accurate, as opposed to, say, something where maybe I just kind of go like that and I say to myself, yeah, there we go. There's the contour of my surface. But if we actually draw through on that, we're going to see that the contour is probably going to be something more like that, where the way that that contour wraps around the sides here and here, that's often the giveaway, where if the surfacing is added and it doesn't conform properly to where the form is wrapping around away from us, that's where the surfacing is going to start calling attention to itself, or it's not going to feel quite believable. So step one is to make sure we really understand our forms. So there's kind of the front side of that contour, and if I draw through and wrap that around to the back side, it's going to indicate something along those lines. And as a person gets more experienced, there's a little bit less of a need to actually sit and draw all of these contour lines around the form, but it's kind of a fun exercise. And it doesn't have to be limited just to the one form either. There are things we can do. Let's say if we have a couple of spheres and we want to start mashing those together in some fun and interesting ways, we might get some situations where maybe those spheres have collided in a certain way. And so now you're going to have the surface of the one sphere and the surface of that other sphere, and they might have slight differences in terms of how they're being textured, how they're being surfaced, and then that those contrasts playing against each other can be pretty cool to look at. Or maybe we have a sphere that's gotten super stretched out here, and if we imagine the contours for that, there might be much more distance between those spans in the center there because of how that form is stretched out. And then along the front, we might have something like this, and then that's looping around the back, and we would be going around the back side, something like that. Or if we maybe take that sphere and maybe let me see now, if we were going to twist it, This volume would be coming around. So maybe now we've taken that sphere and we've actually twisted it like we're wringing out some laundry. Again, we're going to have the contours that are coming around on that upper piece. Then we're going to have, we can indicate that bit of twist that's coming through those contours there. Maybe we can even throw another one in there. Indicate another twist through those contours there, and then get all the way into the bottom one there. So it's kind of a fun exercise to try and imagine those contours and those forms, because all of that experimenting is going to pay off when it comes time to actually draw a fully rendered character or whatever it is that we're drawing. And also if we need to add wrinkles or say cut-in lines or something, that also needs to conform to those contours. So if we have our little bean shape here, but if we want to add more of a fleshy texture over on that side there, first we have to understand the contours that we're dealing with, so that when we do put those extra folds in, they're gonna feel like they belong. So here I've indicated some of my contours. So when I do start putting, and here you can see even I'm drawing through, when I put that fold in, I'm starting from the back side and wrapping it around the front, so that when I do get that indication right there, it is feeling like it belongs. And we'll get one more in there. There we go. One more, why not? So I'm kind of feeling around the edge of that contour. And now when I bring this in to complete, there we go. So now we have that nice stretch down the one side. We've got a nice squash down the other side, and going in and starting to add surface details, be they scales or whatnot, we can start to make sure that those are all really conforming. So in the context of a character, different parts of the drawing are going to have bits of folded skin, say if the brows are raised up, and we get all of that frontalis muscle is bunching up the skin in the forehead. You're going to get those folds there. Clothes are going to wrinkle and fold around the forms. A finger bending is going to have contours that those wrinkles have to go around. So this is a good skill if you're trying to create these these believable images with believable rendering on them. So just sticking with those simple shapes and then rendering some kind of a surface onto those simple shapes. Let's see. I was thinking it might be fun to just turn something into a bit of a wacky little character here, just so we have something to look at. Let's see. There's one leg there. It's going to be kind of oddly proportioned little I don't know what. Let's get another little bit of weight is taken off of this one. I don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole because this isn't really the main focus for tonight. Let's throw some details on there that we can work with the surfacing. This is just a weird. And even though I'm not drawing the contour lines on here right now, I'm being mindful of them. And if you kind of pay attention to what my cursor is doing, I'm visualizing through sort of a mental projection onto that form, so that when I do come down with that crease line, it is going to feel like it belongs. And same with this one over here. I'm visualizing the form here, so that when I do come down with that crease line, again, it's going to feel more like it belongs there. And let me just, I'll do sort of a visualization, because it feels to me like there's a bit of a pout going on there. And let's see, googly eyes are always great in my book. A couple of googly eyes there, and let's just erase some of those lines in behind there. Some of this here. I think this is a bit of a lackadaisical kind of character here. There we go. We'll just keep it simple. Get something kind of funky in there. Even though the eye is kind of disembodied from the head, just going to make sure that these eyelashes kind of, or sorry, eyebrows, I just want to make sure they feel like they belong in a sort of a unified space there with those eyes. And I'm just gonna speed things up. Just get some simple little hands in there. Okay, so we've got our drawing. We're super happy with it. We're ready to surface it. We've got some fun kind of little fabric folds here and there. Just gonna revisit some of those fabric folds there real quick. Trying to not take too long, but I can't help but just, there we go. There we go. It's always good to indicate where the zipper's at. Okay, so let's move on to our actual surfacing steps here and add some details onto this. So we already talked about the drawing through and the contour lines. So I am going to be keeping that in mind. Just to remember where and like I said earlier, most specifically keeping in mind those moments where the contour is kind of wrapping away from us, to make sure that we are paying attention to that. Now, I did introduce some folds into the face, so we're going to have to take those into account as well. So oftentimes when I'm about to start drawing in, let me switch to, I want to use more of like a pencil tool. What have we got there? A little bit smaller perhaps. Yeah, okay, that'll work. When I do start approaching the surfacing of the character, I do actually like to have a bit of an indication of those forms, because especially here where I introduced these new wrinkles around the face, there's going to be an interruption now in that contour. So I've got to be thinking about that, because that's going to influence how I approach the surfacing on this character. And so up here at the top, this is going to come down here, and the mouth is flesh. There's thickness, so I've got to be thinking about how the contour of that mouth would be wrapping around to the inside, because again, that's going to influence how. And here there's a little bit of, again, that interruption there, little interruption here. And for the bottom lip, again, similar, the lip is going to have thickness, so I want to be paying attention to that. And this fold right here is going to have some thickness, and this fold right here is going to have some thickness. So even though the drawing itself was pretty flat and graphic, just by throwing some of these contour lines on there, you can see I'm already able to start indicating more of a grounded appearance to the character. And I would normally go and put these little indications on where I want to really start building up the surface. I haven't decided yet if, like, what type of surface detail I'm planning to go with, but going through this process right here, it can be a nice way just to familiarize yourself with the form that much more, and also let you brainstorm a little bit. I mean, is it going to be the same kind of surfacing all around the character? Could it actually be some different surfacing treatments in other areas? Like the eyelids would probably end up having a much different surface than the body, and even the eyeball itself. If you're gonna, pardon me, if you're planning to render light and shadow onto the eyeball, then you have to remember that that's a spherical shape which has volume, has mass. And so the way that the light wraps around it, or the way that the light bounces off of it, is going to do so in a really particular way. Let me adjust go for more of a black. And so yeah, that's something that I would continue going around the figure and kind of just, like I said, it's a nice way to kind of let yourself brainstorm sort of what could end up going on as a surface treatment in those areas, in addition to, again, just helping those forms to feel more realized and not just like a flat object. Cool. So let me think for a second. I mean, we could go scaly, or we could go like dry skin with a lot of cracks and a lot of roughness in the texture. Maybe I'll do a couple different things. So around the perimeter, and as if it's wrapping around to the back side, I'll go with like more of a scaly thing, and I'm not gonna go and do the whole character, but I'll just show you kind of wrapping the details around a couple of areas, and then you can kind of extrapolate from there and picture how that's going to go around the rest of it. What's generally a good idea to do is to know roughly what the design of your scales are going to look like. Here, I'm just going to go with just going to change up my my tools just a bit here. There we go. And I'll start working in red, just so we can see how that kind of comes out. So when we're doing our scales, sometimes it's helpful to just draw off to the side and kind of brainstorm a little bit. What do we want those scales to look like? Could it be more of a pointy scale or more of a rounded scale? I feel like pointy might not be the right approach, since we have this kind of, dumpy whatever he is. So I'm thinking rounded might be a better choice. But I could also draw a cross section of that scale just to brainstorm. Well, I think I want to make sure that the scale has a curvature to it, because as the scales layer one on top of the other, I want to make sure that I'm drawing them in such a way that I have those opportunities. So those are a couple informative little drawings off to the side that just let me brainstorm my scales a little bit more. And depending on different parts of the body, a creature that is a scaled creature, it's typically going to have a variation of size of scales. So like in an area in the body that's much more flexible, the scales are typically going to be much smaller. And in some parts of the body, the scales will actually taper off into just skin. So if this is like, you know, a highly flexible part, maybe around the mouth or any of these folds here that where the volume is just much more compressed, that'll be something I'll want to think about. But when we get into a more wide open form around here, then the scales could start to get more on the bigger side, so that it feels like there's more of a uniformity between the surfacing details and the form that's underneath. Okay, so I'm going to keep that in mind, and I'm going to keep that in mind. And you know, I could have that's something I could have over on a separate piece of paper, or you know, out of the margin somewhere. So we're going to start sort of anywhere here, but I've indicated with those form lines underneath, I've indicated what the contour might look like. That's actually off. I'm going to redraw that. It's best to kind of start in those areas where the contour lines were first placed, just as sort of an anchor point. So I'm going to say that my scales in this larger area are going to maybe be around that size. So you'll notice one of the things that I'm doing right here is I'm making sure to wrap. So as these scales move around the surface, the way that the scales are drawn, you can see they're drawn as if they're conforming to that surface. So down here, I'm making the scales progressively more narrow because the underlying form is starting to wrap and pitch away from us. So I want those scales to feel like they match that. And I'm just being mindful. Another thing that I'm going to do here is I'm going to start to taper them in on the front side as well. So throwing down these guiding lines like this can be a big help, and just keep those details nice and organized. Yeah, so I'm going to have the scales kind of shrink in size as they go around. But remembering here, my scales are not flat against the skin. They're actually raised up a little bit. So that's something I can keep in mind here as I go to actually wrap that scale around the back side, which means that that dark black line that exists right now is not going to be the final result, because there's going to be all of this stuff added on top. And maybe I have one other row there. And so that second row, our scales typically alternate in terms of where they're placed. So the move that so it's in the view there. So that next round, again, is gonna conform. So you can see these ones here are continuing that wrap around. And now this one is getting wider because these are coming more around to face us straight on. And so the kind of radiating angling of those scales as they go around, if I continue projecting those all around the character, then you get an idea of how those might end up looking. And I've tried to leave enough room behind that first row of scales before this crease here, because I think that is going to end up being a benchmark spot where the next row after this crease, which is on this form here, those are probably going to start being smaller, just to conform with what's going on there. So if I kind of, let's just quickly indicate. So I'm going to make these a little bit smaller as we go through. And then these ones might end up being maybe in this, somewhere in this realm here. Again, just trying to still be mindful of my contour, even though I'm kind of speeding up my pace here. You can see that my scales continue to be a slave to that underlying contour. Okay, so he's starting to get some scales there. Now, if we want to really make the final image pop, then we have to start thinking about, you know, rendering light and shadow and ambient occlusion and all that stuff. So let's drop. This is essentially a rough layer, and I guess that guy underneath is probably a rough layer as well, because our finished result is going to end up looking a little bit different when I switch into sort of a final line mode. I like to get this pinky out, so the pinky is resting on the surface, whether it's my Cintiq or whether it's a piece of paper, because the that position there, the pen or pencil or stylus, just it's nice and steady, and now I can really focus on using the shoulder mechanics just to get my lines moving around. So it's good to try, you know, different grip techniques. Okay, let's put that up, and let me just quickly go through on a new layer. And I don't want to labor the drawing underneath, or sorry, the finished lines too much. I'm even going to deviate from the underdrawing if it suits me, just in order to keep the lines nice and fresh. these ones here. These lines right now are purely a means to an end. So until I've achieved the finished piece, nothing is sacred and everything is up for debate as to how it's been drawn. For example, he might have a pocket right there. Okay, that's as far as I want to go with putting finished lines on there. We can start to explore what the rendering might start to look like, because we have a couple things that we need to keep in mind here. We've got the overlap of the scales. So that means in all of these areas here, we're going to be getting sort of an ambient occlusion between the underlying and the overhanging scales. So there's going to be that kind of a relationship there, and the scales are probably not totally flat on the top. They probably have a little bit more of maybe a ridge down the middle, and that's something that we can use in our favor to kind of speed along the rendering process of that by having more shadow below that center line and more light above it. So if we want to quickly decide for ourselves that maybe the light is like a top 3/4 key light coming in sort of over here, now we can start to render these accordingly. So I'm using a synthetic brush here. I really like the way that these feel. They kind of allow for a bit of a bit more of a natural feel on the Cintiq screen. It reminds me of working with watercolors, in that with watercolors you have to be pretty mindful of where you're starting and then blending out away from that spot. So I'm just going to put a little dab on each of those scales there to get started, and similarly I'll go down on the next round. And everything when we're creating is going to follow the general to specific rule or rule of engagement. We're always going to start with the broadest brush stroke details, and slowly we're going to refine down to the finer and finer details. So now that ambient occlusion is going to start coming in from those scales on the upper. So I'm going to start indicating that on these scales that have been layered underneath here. So there you see, that's just dropping those scales more into the shadow there. Sorry, I keep moving my work area out of the viewable area, so I'll try and keep an eye on that. And so I'll kind of go around and just be even a little bit more bold with that. And so here I'll kind of go around those little guys. Make sure that I've got some of my ambient occlusion working for me there. And I'll continue around like that. Giving that, here I'm kind of rushing. There's no need to rush here. I like to avoid the undo button as much as I can, but I'm just gonna take advantage of it there. So again, yeah, you know, using that synthetic brush, if I start from the area that's going to end up being the most in shadow, the most dark, and blend outwards from there, it's got a nice look to it. I really like that. Just blend that in there, blend that in there. Okay, so yeah, you get the idea. So I'm starting to establish the light direction that's falling on those scales. I have to be careful in areas like this because I don't want to let a highlight start to confuse the light direction. So really make sure you get in there when you're doing your, you know, drawing in your rendering, to make sure that your shadow treatment or your color treatment, it's not stopping prematurely, like right here. It may seem like it's not a big deal, but those little details can start to take away from the believability or the plausibility of what you're trying to get the audience to buy into. So it's about keeping a consistency. And you also have to be careful that you don't accidentally change your light direction partway through the process. That's definitely happened to me before. So we've got some light falling on the upper side here. We've got some shadow on the lower side. And if we continue around, we can continue adding in the rendering on those scales and conforming it to the surface that's there. And scales are kind of a nice little exercise as well, because they're the mechanics of how scales get grouped together and how they all work together. It gives you a lot to work with in terms of light and shadow and occlusion, and maybe the scales have a specularity to them, and each of those individual scales is gonna come with its own set of those contours, and you can design those scales as well. Maybe you want to have them peak in a certain way, you know, where they scoop, or maybe they're more of a domed shape. But again, whether you're drawing scales or whether you're drawing skin folds, even if your character is going to be covered in hair, where those hairs are growing from in the way that they're being drawn and the way that those hairs conform or wrap around, it all comes from an understanding of what the contours are doing underneath. So the next time you're looking at a dog, or the next time you're looking at a cat, or even looking at the hairs on your arm, or if you've got a tattoo, the way that the tattoo is wrapping around the forms of your arm, and start paying attention to how those surface details are basically having to, you know, wrap around that form that we've indicated. You can start to really understand, you know, how important an understanding of those forms and drawing through and getting the full scope of that form first. All of that is going to inform how those details are added, so it doesn't start to flatten out. And on my stream last week, I think that I was working on the spicy prompt word from Inktober. So I've kind of started slowing down in terms of the turnaround speed. It's kind of becoming like Inktober week by week instead of day by day for me. But I'm currently in you know, the rendering stages of the little granny character here, and so I'm starting to explore the rendering and the surfacing, and it's a fun stage. I really enjoy that a lot. I enjoy every stage a lot. Granny Pina, oh my god, Rick, you had to take it back to 44 Cats, didn't you? It does have some Pina vibes, doesn't it? Granny Pina. But yeah, I'm just starting to explore, and you can kind of see in the upper arm there and the occlusion underneath the shirt sleeve, and even inside the shirt sleeve, and also along the apron, and even on the pot that's on the stove there. You can probably even still see that my painting on of the surface, it's done in a way that conforms to what that form was underneath. You don't want to spend all this time establishing the line art just to flatten it with surfacing that doesn't conform to what's underneath. Yeah, so that's kind of it for tonight. That was my little deep dive into drawing. What did I call it? How to draw surfacing onto your forms. So I hope those of you who tuned in for the live enjoyed that. Those of you watching this after the fact, likewise, I hope you enjoy that. And if you are enjoying the content that I'm putting out there for you, please do me a favor, subscribe to my channel, put a like on the videos. That's going to help me a lot in my goal right now, to reach the requirements that I need so that I can become a YouTube partner and start actually monetizing from this channel. So yeah, just a small thing that you can do, and it helps me out a lot. Okay, so thanks everybody. We'll see you in the next one, and stay sketchy.